I'm very happy to be here to discuss this topic of courage with you at the inaugural Stoicon-X Military Conference. My family, both biological and adoptive, includes generations of people who have served mostly in the Army, but also in some other branches as well. So this is an occasion of some pride for me to actually be able to take part in this, and hopefully it'll be useful for you as well. The topic that I'm going to talk about is the scope of genuine courage, the way that the Stoics understand it. And the reason that we're going to be talking about this is that courage is something that's easily, often, and to our detriment, misunderstood. I think there's perhaps more of a danger of this in the military and in other similar professions where courage is genuinely needed, and we'll see that it covers a wide ground, more than just standing up to fears. But this can be helpful for anybody in any walk of life, I think. Stoicism can help us to recognize, understand, develop, and deploy genuine courage, and also to avoid some problematic misunderstandings. And before we get started, I just want to talk very briefly about three things that often get called Stoicism, because we only want to focus on one here. So the first is what we often call lowercase s Stoicism. It's not really a philosophy, it's more of a personality trait or disposition, the stiff upper lip, not showing emotion, all of that sort of stuff. That can be okay, that can be useful, but we're going to put it aside. Another thing that I want to say is actually bad is fake Stoic philosophy. There's a lot of people out there who are capitalizing on the current interest in Stoicism by putting stuff out there that's really just facsimiles and reductions of Stoicism. We want to try to avoid that as well. What we want to draw upon instead is genuine Stoic philosophy and practice. Where do we get that? Well, if you think about what modern Stoicism is, it's an adaptation or interpretation of ancient Stoicism, and ancient Stoicism is found in texts and thinkers, in books that you need to study. Those are the hallmarks, those are the criterion for anything that's going to call itself Stoicism in the present. We don't have to be slavishly devoted to it, but we do have to be faithful to it. So what does Stoicism teach? Well, it tells us that courage is a virtue, and, some of the Stoics actually point out that we don't have to study philosophy in order to grasp what courage is. Seneca in letter 120 talks about examples or paradigms. He actually uses the word analogy as well. And these are when we see people doing things that are courageous, and we're like, well, that's pretty extraordinary. I want to be like that person. We're attracted to it. Cicero, in his works, also brings up similar examples, and he cautions us, hey, don't expect people to be totally virtuous. We want to have the kind of virtue that we can relate to, the virtue that we see in our workplaces, in our families, in other places as well. But we can go deeper. Stoic philosophy does give us a systematic approach to courage, and there's three things that I want to highlight here. One of them is what courage is for. What's the point of it? What is it good for? Another is what courage extends to, and this is what we call the scope of courage. The third is how courage fits in with the other virtues, which we also need. So courage, according to the Stoics, is grounded not just in sort of animal responses and affectivity, but also in our rational human nature. In Seneca's letter 120, he also tells us that fears need to be dealt with, but Cicero goes further, as does Seneca in other places, pointing out that it's not just fear, but also desire, also sadness, also anger, as we're going to talk about later on, that need to be harnessed and roped in some cases even put out of the picture. In On Duty, Cicero talks about courage and the point of it as an ability to achieve tasks, as involving greatness of spirit rising above, a way of dealing with dangers and toils. So that's the function of courage. Let's talk about its scope now. So Cicero, again, is somebody very helpful. He talks about, two aspects, having a brave and a great spirit. One of those aspects is disdain for everything but what is honorable or right, not yielding to other people, our own agitation of spirit or fortune. That's one aspect. The other aspect is, in that mentality, to do deeds great and beneficial, to undertake difficult and laborious tasks, even at the risk of life. So that's one presentation. Arius Didymus, in his Epitome of Stoic Ethics, breaks courage down into 5 sub-virtues. And these are not necessarily all of it, but this is actually a great list. He tells us that courage consists in perseverance, karteria in Greek, which is a kind of enduring, persisting in the face of difficult things. Intrepidness, tharolotes, which also can be translated as confidence, facing up to what seems but isn't actually terrible, things that scare us. Great-heartedness, megalopsychia, this is the rising above again, acting above what occurs normally in worthwhile and also trivial things. Stout-heartedness, eupsychia, not being able to be changed or shifted once you've actually decided what you're going to do. And then the 5th one is very interesting. It's called industriousness, philoponia, literally a love for taking on the tough stuff. And this involves accomplishing what is proposed without being prevented by the toils involved. So these are some very important aspects of courage. Notice 2 things about this. One of these is that there's much more emphasis placed on doing, on choosing, on actions than on feeling a certain way. The other is a person might have some aspects or qualities of this, but not have the whole package. And so having a breakdown like this helps us to figure out where we need to add in the parts that we're missing. What governs courage? What should structure it? What should orient it? This is an absolutely central point for the Stoics. In letter 85, Seneca stresses the rationality of courage. He says, courage is neither rash bravado, nor thrill-seeking, nor love of danger. Rather, it is a knowledge of how to distinguish between what is good and bad. Courage, he says, is careful of its own safety, yet it is also very well able to endure things whose bad appearance is false. So there's a knowledge aspect to courage as well as a action aspect to it. Marcus Aurelius, at a number of points in the Meditations, adds courage to a listing of the virtues that we ought to have, implying that these are going to be integrated in a person of good character. What are the others he brings up? Justice, self-control, prudence, and honesty. In On Duties, Cicero really tells us a lot. There's 3 key things I want to focus on here. One is that he engages in a classically Stoic disconnect between anger and courage. It's too easy to think that anger is needed in order for us to be courageous, when actually they're kind of apart from each other. A great work on this would be Seneca's On Anger, where he talks about this at considerable length. Second thing is he talks about the danger of those who have and exhibit something like courage of falling into willfulness, wanting to have their own way, an excessive desire for preeminence, to run the show, to tell everybody else what to do for glory. And he says that this can drive people to injustice. And now this is a really key point. Courage is governed by justice. He says if courage is empty of justice, if it fights not for the common safety, but for its own advantages, it is a vice, a savagery. And he tells us the Stoics define courage well when they call it the virtue that fights on behalf of fairness. So when we're being courageous, there should be an integration with, as well as challenges by, the other key Stoic virtues, and perhaps by other people who have to call us out on our own lack of virtue. Now, what I've presented to you here is not intended to provide a comprehensive and systematic study of the scope of courage, but hopefully it will spur you towards thinking more and more deeply about courage, and to turning to classic Stoic texts and thinkers as resources. Thank you for your time.